In 1936, Jonathan Kozol was born in Boston, Massachusetts. In his youth, he attended a boarding school near Boston until 1954. Kozol then attended Harvard University and was offered a scholarship to Oxford. Rather than further his education in England, Kozol decided to learn how to write from acclaimed authors living in Paris at the time. Upon return to America, Kozol took up teaching at a public school in Boston. In his first book, Death at an Early Age, Kozol recounts his time teaching at this overcrowded and underfunded public school in Boston, where his experiences engaged him in the civil rights movement. His time teaching at this school became the foundation for the rest of his career. In the book, Kozol highlights the poor condition of the school as he taught students in a corner of an auditorium because there weren't enough classrooms. He also writes about the abuse and mistreatment his students endured due to their skin color. Students were called animals by teachers, and in some instances, corporal punishment was used. Kozol was eventually fired from the school for teaching a poem by Langston Hughes about white landlords exploiting their black tenants. Kozol's time at this school laid the framework for the rest of his career as an activist. He was an advocate for integrated education and highlights discrepancies in funding between majority white schools and the ones primarily attended by black and Latino students. In Kozol's eyes, the unequal funding was not by accident. His life's work has been to advocate for equal funding among all public schools, as all students deserve the same opportunities for quality education. In 1991, Kozol wrote more about the unequal education in his book, Savage Inequalities. In this book, he went to different areas in the country and spent time at the schools which had the highest per-student spending and the lowest. His findings show that the schools with the lowest funding per student was always in areas with high minority populations. These populations, despite having higher poverty rates, were also facing higher taxation rates than the wealthy areas. The conditions these students were attempting to learn in were often run down, unsanitary, and lacked books and other learning materials. Kozol compares his findings in this book to the segregation-era schools which triggered the landmark Brown v. Board of Education case. To Kozol, the American education system is not equal among all children, and anyone who sees a problem with this needs to find the courage to fight for change. Kozol's beliefs can be seen as radical, and his education style and beliefs align most closely to the progressivism movement. Some quotes from Kozol which summarize his mindset and his work are as follows. After all these years, America still runs a separate and unequal school system. So long as these kinds of inequalities persist, all of us who are given expensive educations have to live with the knowledge that our victories are contaminated because the game was rigged to our advantage. Let's concede that we have decided to let our children grow up in two separate nations and lead two separate kinds of lives. If, on the other hand, we have the courage to rise to this challenge, to name what's happening within our inner city schools, then we also need the courage to fight like hell to change it. Instead of seeing these children for the blessings that they are, we are measuring them only by the standard of whether they will be future deficits or assets for our nation's competitive needs. But for the children of the poorest people, we are stripping the curriculum, removing the arts and music, and drilling the children into useful labor. We are not valuing a child for the time in which she is actually a child. And then his final critique of American education, Kozol wrote, "Apartheid education, rarely mentioned in the press or openly confronted even among once progressive educators, is alive and well and rapidly increasing now in the United States."